everyone. Welcome to our first ever Book Wyrm Club meeting, hosted by myself, Alex, from the channel Frank Fiction, and the amazing, fantastic, wonderful Kat from Kat's Novel Adventures. Hello, Kat. I'm so excited to be here with you in the
Hello.
chat.
Hello, Alex, and hello, all of our friends out there who are joining us.
So we read Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. So I actually have a little thing to put up here. You can see Kat and I's editions are different, which we'll get into more in the chat as well. But if you read the book, put a red heart. If you didn't read it, put a black heart. And if you DNF'd it, put a skull. We thought that that would be the funniest way to kind of go about this.
That means you killed the book.
Yeah, you just were like, I'm not having anything to do with this. So, Kat, before we get started, would you mind giving a brief introduction to yourself and your channel with regards to what you typically read?
Sure. I am Kat of Kat's Novel Adventures, and I have had my channel for almost 2 years, and I primarily read a variety of things, but I primarily read horror, mystery, thriller, love middle grade, love picture books, and like a little bit of sci-fi, fantasy. Not a big romance person, and if I do pick up a romance, it's generally clean. I'm not into those steamy closed door. Is that what it is? No, open door. I'm not into those open door kind of romances. But yeah, that's typically what I like to read. And I'm usually open to trying new authors. So
Yeah, I love how widely you read, Kat, because I also read pretty widely. And for those of you who are here, unless you've come over from Kat's channel, which is why I'll give a brief introduction to myself as well. As I said, I'm Alex. On my channel, Frank Fiction, I predominantly read science fiction and horror with some fantasy thrown in. And I also really enjoy some historical fiction. I also don't read romance, though admittedly, I do have some that I've picked up just because I want to see what it is, but I don't think any of it's going to be steamy whatsoever. So I'd like to think I read pretty widely, but I definitely have a heavy focus on science fiction and horror because those are my two favorite genres. So Kat and I kind of connected on like a lot of the horror stuff, which is how we started being friends. And she also got me into reading more middle grade and feeling like it's cool to read middle grade as an adult, which is something
it
I
is
appreciate.
very cool for you to read middle grade. I think. I think it's comfort reading for me. Sometimes, like people say they're in a reading slump.
Mm-hmm.
Pick up a middle grade book, and you might not be in that slump any longer.
I agree with that 100%. And I'm also happy just because I do see that some people did not read Neverwhere. So I am happy to provide the pitch, the synopsis for you, if you will, of what this book is about. And this is spoiler free as well, just in case you end up wanting to click off by the time we get to the spoiler section. So, Neverwhere is the story of Richard Mayhew, who stumbles upon this strange girl who is bleeding out on the streets of London. And she comes from this invisible world known as the London Below. And when Richard decides to help her, he inadvertently ends up completely altering his life. And he is forced to kind of go on this dangerous, weird adventure with her to like help her solve her problem in order to attempt to get his life back. So, Kat, would you agree with that?
Yes.
Anything you want to add?
Your pitch was very wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm happy to see the surprising number of people. Heidi, I knew that you did. I knew if you showed up, Heidi, you'd be like skull, which is actually why I put that in there, is because I thought Heidi might want to be like no, which I thought was funny. But I do want to start with everybody as well. We're going to actually begin by everybody saying their ratings, because what we're hoping for out of this discussion, and definitely what I think will be kind of fun, is everything that we say after this moment is going to, it's going to make a lot of sense why somebody is going to be giving that opinion. And that goes for Kat and I as well. And so, Kat, do you want to go ahead and start with your rating, and then I'll tell you mine?
My rating is a 4.
A
As of
4.
this moment, yes. Well,
Okay.
can I explain that originally I had put 3.5 as my rating to myself, but once I started doing notes and like reliving the story and going through all my information, and Alex came up with some really awesome questions, I decided I'm going to do the 4 because I'm like, I have my reasons, but it is a 4. I'm going to be solid with that right now.
I like that. You know, because 4 is a solid rating. Because on my channel, a 4 means that you would recommend that somebody read it one time. You know, it might not
Yes.
be a book you return to, but it's one you recommend reading once.
Right.
So I always think that that's a solid rating. So that's awesome. Mine was a 5 star. I will say that I kind of waffled a little bit initially. I was like, oh, is it like a 4.5 or is it a 5? And I was going through and I was looking at other 4.5s I had given this year, and I felt that Neverwhere was better than those.
Mm.
And so I was like, well, the only natural option then is that it has to be a 5 star.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I gave it a 5 star personally is because I felt like I was sucked into the world of London Below. This is also spoiler free, just like letting everybody know. But I thought that the setting was really weird and it was varied. And I love weird books when they do weirdness well, and you never knew
Mm-hmm.
it was going to be around the corner. And I also felt like the characters were realistic outside of the magical elements, you know, magic aside. I felt like they were very realistic. And this book reminded me that Gaiman and Terry Pratchett were such good friends,
Mm-hmm.
because like the way that this story flowed and like how they were going from place to place and how everything kind of connected back in the narrative reminded me a lot of a Discworld novel, which is like the biggest compliment that, you know, I can give, because I can't ever shut up about Terry Pratchett. But they were great friends, which is why they co-wrote a book together, which is like one of my favorite books of all time. But um, I did also wonder throughout the book whether things that were put in the beginning would have a payoff at the end. And I'm excited to talk about, you know, those things as well. So with, you know, we showed our copies of the book,
Mm-hmm.
and yours does not have illustrations and mine does. And I wanted to, in my probably terrible attempt on this webcam, I will try to show you some of them, because my question for you, Kat, is do you think that if you had read like a different version of the book, or like that maybe you would have had a different opinion with
Well,
your writing?
yes. Well, for a couple of things. The only thing I have in my book is the map. That's all I
Oh, it
have.
actually gave you a map?
I
Okay,
have a
I don't
map.
have that.
You
So
see,
that's cool.
it's my end papers for both
Okay.
both sides.
Okay.
So, you have the London Underground with detail with the legend and everything. So I do have a map,
Okay.
but I I am kind of new to audiobook listening. I really just started in February, and I haven't read many, audiobooks, maybe 10 throughout the year or something like that. Now, I've been very picky about what I've read, mostly mystery. And I feel like part of why my rating is the way it is it would have been helpful to have some illustrations, because I've read Gaiman before, and the books I've read have had illustrations in them. Or I have seen an adaptation, a screen adaptation that also can give that to me. And I know that there is one of that of this, like a TV show or something.
Hmm. The
But
TV show came first. This is one of those rare
because
cases.
of
Yeah.
how intricate the setting is, I think I needed to read it fully with my eyeballs. So I think that did have an impact on my rating. And it will be a book I would have to read again.
That's fair.
I might actually even watch the adaptation and then reread it. I don't know when that would be, but for the purposes of our discussion today, yeah. So I do think the way you digest a book really does, because the illustrations, you love them, didn't you?
I did, but I'm also a fan of Chris Riddell, or Riddle, however you say
Yeah.
his name. But he's done all the illustrations for Gaiman's books in the past, including like Coraline, the Graveyard Book, Fortunately, the Milk.
Odd.
You
He
know.
did one version of Odd and the Frost Giants. He did
Okay.
my version, but there is a
Okay.
Brett Helquist edition out of Odd and the Frost Giants as well. So yeah.
I do think it added a lot. When I initially started reading Gaiman, I did not have an illustrated edition. So my very first Gaiman book was The Ocean at the End of the Lane. And I
Mm,
honestly think it was good for me that that book didn't have anything because I had to rely fully on my imagination. I
mhm.
still think I would have loved Neverwhere without the illustrations personally. And I think it's because it would have made me have to imagine more. Because, of course, Chris Riddell's illustrations are not realistic, they're cartoony. And so, that kind of adds like a whimsy, if you will, to the story, whereas a lot of parts of this are actually quite dark, which we'll get
Mhm,
into.
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
but yeah, I'm very happy that I picked up this copy. I thought it was really cool. And I like the way that Dor looks too. I like the way that she's
Yeah,
depicted. So
I was jealous of your illustrated copy. I will tell you. I
I'm
was.
sorry. The last like non-spoiler section, because there's really not a whole lot if we want to get into like the meat and potatoes of the book, right, that we could do that's not spoiler. But I would like to do what you thought were the initial impressions of the characters. So I'll name a character and I want you to tell me what you thought of them at the beginning, and then as we go through the questions we'll kind of talk about like how they changed over the course of
Okay.
the book.
Is this like rapid fire?
No, 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 you do not have to give like a short one sentence answer. You can answer however you want. And so the first character I wanted to start with, of course, has to be Richard.
Oh, yes. Yes. Well, I have my notes here all in different places. Richard, first impression of Richard is ordinary guy, and the person that came to my mind as I was envisioning Richard was Simon Pegg. He kind of reminded me of Simon Pegg in Shaun of the Dead.
Okay. I know who that is. I've seen that movie. I get that reference. That's great.
So that's kind of how I felt about him at the beginning. He's not very ambitious. He will go with the flow. He's kind of a rule follower. You know, he doesn't really want to disappoint people, but he ends up doing it anyway because he isn't very ambitious or worried about declaring any greatness in his life. Like he's okay with just having his job, going to work, having very simple, which there's nothing wrong with being simple, but considering what ends up happening to him and who he's dating or whatever, it's
Mhm.
it's it's just mind blowing to me that that's who he was dating, being this guy. What about you?
I felt like he was that guy that was just content to kind of float through life, and he was a guy that things happened to, not that he
Yes.
caused things to happen. So like his interaction with Dor and the fact that he helps, which Dor will be our next character, but the fact that he decides to help her and has like agency in that, and then immediately has everything else stripped away from him. He spends the rest of the book, it seems like, just not wanting to believe anything he sees with his eyes. I was like, this is the most stubborn character I have ever seen, and not particularly heroic either, which I found to be kind of funny. So yeah, Richard was such an interesting. I don't even necessarily want to call him a main character. He is.
He is the main character, and he really is our protagonist.
Yeah, is it a deuteragon or deuteragonist though? Like, do you feel like maybe there's more than one main character? Is it Richard?
I think it's Richard, and the reason
Okay,
I say that is because Richard he is the one that really does have the most transformation in the entire book. I
I
mean, when you think
totally
about
agree.
him from beginning to end, I mean, his character development is just incredible, honestly, because if you think of what you're starting with, and I know what people are probably thinking, when you're kind of at the bottom in the mailroom, really all you can do is go up, right?
Yeah.
If
But
you're
he was
faced
pretty
with stuff,
successful. He was successful, though.
he
He worked in
was.
finance, like, he was doing pretty
I
well
know,
for
I know.
himself.
But you know what I'm
So
saying. I
I do.
mean, when
Yeah.
you're not really, you have low expectations for yourself,
Mhm,
really, when you're put in the positions that Richard is put in,
mhm.
um, and have to experience it, it could have gone one of two ways. I mean, he could have turned out a little bit differently. I've seen things like that. Like you always think somebody has this monumental experience that they're gonna be like, "Da-da," but
Yeah.
sometimes it doesn't. out that way. But
No.
yeah, I think Richard is our protagonist. To me, he's the one that has grown the most as a character throughout. And um I know everybody that comes in contact with Richard influences his character development.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
So
And I love
but
the way that you framed that. So thank you. That's really great. So our next character is going to be Door. What were your first
hmm.
impressions of Door?
Well, considering how we meet Door, um, I feel like she's someone, I felt like she was someone that was powerful enough to have to escape her circumstances, and she was tough because of what happened to her, considering how he finds her and what is done to her. So I just thought she just seemed like a resilient, resourceful person that
Hmm.
obviously has some magical ability.
Yeah.
So that was my impression.
I love that she is very much herself and
Hmm.
she does not care. Like those are always my favorite characters are the ones that they have a heart of gold, but they're very true to themselves. And Door is that at the core of her being.
Yes, no
And she knows
apologies at all.
no,
Once,
no,
whatever.
no. Well, she did apologize to Richard for ruining his life. So that's like the one thing she was like, "I'm sorry, Richard."
Well,
You
she
know,
kind of did, but then it was like,
bye,
okay, so let's go. It's like, I'm
peace.
sorry, but oh well, now I gotta go. So do you.
Yeah, yeah. I completely agree with that.
It's
And
almost like suck it up, buttercup.
yep. Yeah, it's like you're part of London Below now. Sorry, Richard. But yeah, I like that. Which then of course leads into our arguably one of the most jerkish like I'll curse. This is my channel. I'll curse on my channel. He's kind of an asshole. But the Marquis de Carabas or however you want to pronounce it.
That's how I pronounced it, the Marquis de Carabas. My thing with him was instantly I'm trying to think who he reminds me of. You know, it's characters you've seen in other stories before where they're very charming, but very manipulative, manipulating at the same time. That's how he came off to me. Arrogant, you
Hmm.
know, you're going to owe me kind of thing. I will do this for you, but you're going to owe me and it's going to be big. It's not going to be some like, little thing like you're going to take me to lunch kind of thing.
Yep.
Um, and what was interesting about him was there were moments where I was like, I wish they would just kind of lose this dude because what is his agenda here? You really,
Uh-huh.
I'm just going to say, throughout the whole book, you just didn't know whose side is he on. And then the whole time I just thought, you're in it for yourself. You're in it for yourself. You don't care who you have to step on kind of thing, So that's just the
Mhm.
impression I got from him. But I will say, after reading the short story about him,
Which we'll get to. Yeah.
it it kind of endeared me to him a
Uh-huh.
little bit. I don't know if you felt that way,
Yes,
but
I did. Yeah.
so
I thought that the Marquis was probably the most complex character of all of the characters, and that's my personal opinion because it's as you said, he doesn't do anything for anybody for free. And he spends the entire book admitting to himself that he is not a good person. And that is
right,
how he's built his entire, I'll call it an empire. It's not really an empire, it's mainly himself, but everybody knows him, and everybody knows that he's a scoundrel. And
right.
and that's something that's so interesting because and we could talk about this in a little bit too, the fact that Door went to him and you
Mhm.
spend part of the book wondering why him, like even Richard is like, why did you ask this man who so clearly is not doing this because he cares about you? And
Right.
that ends up coming up later why she ended up
Which
going
is
to
very,
him.
very interesting, and we
It
find out a character trait, which I'm not gonna say right now, but we find out a character trait about him
is. Mhm.
that he's just not willing to really kind of admit to himself or to others perhaps, but his actions speak it more so than his words, if that
Yeah,
makes any sense.
it does.
And I
Yeah.
do think you see that a little bit too with the the short story kind of like emphasizes that.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. And so the next character, is gonna be Hunter,
hmm.
for your first impressions of Hunter.
Well, Hunter, I was like, wow, this is someone who could definitely stand her own in a fight. She's very confident. I mean, I thought, wow, this is nice, like having your own personal bodyguard.
Mhm.
That was my first impression. I was like, oh, so because also of something that happens because she meets Richard actually before she meets Door.
Yes.
So, which I think kind of sets up, and you have the opinion that you have of Hunter, but
Mhm.
hmm,
Yeah, she comes across as being kinda noble, right?
yes.
Like she's
Well,
this character
yes.
that she's out to protect people.
She's like a skilled warrior. Why wouldn't you
Yeah,
want her to be your bodyguard?
exactly. She's the best of the best. You gotta have the best of the best. And, I completely agree with that, and I don't feel like I could say too much more than what you
Right.
said, only because we get into spoiler territory, but, my next character I only have these 2 and then 1 last, so I promise then we'll move on, but what were your initial impressions of Mr. Croup and Vandermar?
Oh, wow. Okay. They are so disgusting and grotesque in such a delicious way, if
Yes,
that makes sense. Like, I
it
was like, if
totally
you
does.
had to have creepy, horrible villains in a story, these were wonderful. And I love the fact that you had one that was like very, you know, articulate, and it was almost like they were together, like one person, but they're both their personalities, I guess.
Mhm.
But you had the one that talks and is the leader, and then you got the other one that's like the follower with his gross food habits.
Yeah, he's the muscle.
But
Yeah.
I love them. I love the fact that they were so off-putting.
Yes, yes. I completely agree that so rarely do I read stories where I feel like the villains are not a caricature of what a villain is, that they truly are the embodiment of just we like hurting people because we find it fun, not
Yes.
because like it's not to be villainous, it's because that's what they truly take pleasure in and they do that as their job only for that reason.
Well, and
Um,
also too, they provided a little bit of comic relief
sometimes, yeah.
in a dark way
Yeah.
that it's like, I shouldn't think that is funny,
Yeah.
but it kinda is in a really disturbing way.
I think that's a lot of Gaiman's humor in this book. This is actually a pretty this is a heavy book and that's
Mhm,
something that I'm looking forward to talking about because while I do think that it's an adventure and I do think there are parts that are fun, there are also some really serious things in here that impressed me and
mhm,
what I was not expecting. And the reason why I went into this being like, oh, it's a YA fantasy. And then I read it, it was like, no, it is not even remotely. It is fully an adult fantasy
mhm, mhm,
story.
and there is a message that's clearly there.
Yeah, very much so.
I mean, there are themes running throughout, but there's one major theme that really, um is important, and a lot of times you don't see that theme, I think, carried out always maybe in more modern text,
Mhm.
but not text, but like modern times maybe, or like in a real world kind of thing mixed with a fantasy world. Maybe not. Maybe I just haven't read many of them.
I no, I think that's fair. I think this one was a very it's like a shot of something. Instead of it kind of feeling like you're ripping a band-aid off, it's like more like you're getting punched in the face. That's always what I call books that like evoke some sort of strong emotion. It's like being
Mhm,
punched in the face, and I tend to
mhm,
like books like that. So the last character that I have, and then I promise we'll move on, is Islington.
mm. Okay, well, I was impressed.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I was like, wow, an angel, and powerful, and this being, and I don't know, I just That was
Yeah,
my initial
yeah,
friend, friend to door, and
uh-huh.
wow, this is gonna be wonderful.
I got a sense at the beginning of the book, that I didn't know what it was, but that Islington was this character who knew a lot of what was going on. Like, there had to be
Mhm,
something there of, like, an all-knowingness. Like, is your I mean, you're talking about an angel, right? Like,
mhm.
what probably the most powerful being we're gonna end up meeting in the book. It was my assumption. It's like, this is gonna be some sort of, like, mighty hammer to solve the problem of whatever Dora is experiencing, and I wanna see the way that that shakes out, and the fact that, they have the initial journey to Islington, and then they have to go back a second time a different way.
Mhm.
I was really curious because it kept being alluded to that the first time you get there's the easiest, the second time is the hard one. I'm like, what does that mean? And I was like very intrigued by that. So yeah, I liked the element of Islington in the book.
Yes. Well, I am actually surprised, if that's your last one, that you have not brought up Jessica.
I didn't because she is a part of a different question that I have.
Okay,
That makes
okay,
sense.
okay.
Yeah, but if you would like to talk about Jessica, you are welcome to.
Well, I just thought my first impressions of Jessica is, on one hand, she just seemed like a kind person. Like, she truly seemed like she cared for Richard, but at the same time, she was also she cared about image,
Mhm.
and she was trying to change Richard, and just even the way she was addressed. She didn't like to be called Jess. She wanted to be
Yeah.
Jessica. It was sort of like, it just initially, and even as we went on, I just kind of felt like, what was the purpose? Were you trying to save him? Did you Were you doing this kind of like a pet project? Let me see if I can
Mhm. To
turn
change
this.
him.
Yes, let me change him from this little average Joe who could be doing so much more with his life, kind of thing. So she was a little bit it was a little bit confusing to me as to really what her agenda was. Or, I almost wondered, are you picking on Richard because you've tried to date people that are like on your level
Hmm.
and you couldn't handle it? So you're picking somebody else you feel like you can kind of mold into who you want them to be? I don't know. That's kind of how I felt about that.
Maybe he's the only one who can stand her. That's
Yeah,
she was
Stina said it on Skeleton Key. She posted, I got the pet project vibe.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. I do think that she was somebody who needed to control their element of the relationship, and like everything that they did and the way that all was going to turn out. And she knew the way that she wanted things to go ahead of time, so it didn't happen that way. She's very miffed, but yet there also seems to be like when Richard talks about them just together in the more intimate moments and
Yes.
not when they're out in public, that it seems like there is love there, which I
Mhm.
think will come up here very soon. And another question that I have, but so we're moving into spoiler territory, just to let everybody
Well, did
know.
you wanna check out any of the comments? Have you put any of them up? I wasn't paying
Yes,
attention
yeah,
'cause I was talking.
I've
So
been
I was
going
just
through them
kinda
all.
looking because Angela has Vandemar, brought Ozzy to mind at one
Yes.
point.
Yeah, I did put that up there. I've been trying to put up everybody's. I liked that. I also like the, comment from Rebecca that,
Yes.
Croup and Vandemar were like the odd couple.
Yes,
Like,
yes,
they only worked because they were together. They could not be
yes.
committed to one another at all.
That
And
is a very good point, but I thought they kinda worked off of each other. You've got the one with who has all the words, who loves to hear himself talk, and then you've got the other one that just wants to pipe in here or there, and then you've got the one that could care less about, food, and then you got the other one that will eat anything and everything.
yep, yep. Is there a toad? Is there something dead on the side of the road? Vandermar's excited about it. Yeah, absolutely. So, but yes, we are moving into spoiler territory
Yes.
just for everybody, which I feel like, 30 minutes of not too spoiler is actually really good because now we're getting into meat and potatoes.
Yes.
Um, was there any part of the book that made you feel really sad or particularly happy? And what was the overall emotion that you had while reading the book?
Oh, wow. Mm. Um, as far as really sad, I think the discovery, Dora's discovery, or like thinking about what happened to her parents, when they are murdered, that
Hmm.
was hard, because it also showed, the whole time Dora's pretty tough and she's handling everything, and that broke her spirit, finding that information out. That did make me sad. It also made me sad, and I felt really bad for Richard, was when Richard goes back to London above.
Yeah.
And I think the saddest part was when they were moving his desk and they
Yeah.
couldn't
Oh my
sleep.
God.
And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was
Or
just
his
like, oh my
apartment. He's
God,
naked in his
yes,
apartment in his
yes.
tub, and the woman's just walking in, doesn't even know he's there. It's just like, yep, we're going to take this.
So that's what made me very sad, was just the fact that, Richard, he might have been simple and he might have been an average person, but I just felt like, I don't know, he went and he helped somebody. That's what I felt bad. I felt like it was a kick in the gut
Yeah.
because, first of all, on principle, just being a good person, he helped Door, even though his girlfriend, his fiance, is saying, if you do this, it's over. Like,
Yep.
this is ridiculous. We cannot do this. You can't help this person. Just give him some money and move on, kind of thing. And so the fact that he helps her and then he goes with her to help her in London below, to come back and find out that basically his whole life doesn't exist anymore. Like, it's been taken away from him. And even though there were things that may not have been great, or he might have just been like ho hum about, he still liked his life,
Yes, he
you
did.
know? So that made me sad. That
Yeah.
did make me sad. It made me sad finding out about the family too. As far as happy moments, I think I think finding out the true nature of the Marquis made me very happy, because I couldn't quite pinpoint what his deal was.
Hmm.
So finding out really that there was more behind the facade,
Hmm.
that made me happy.
And then how did you feel overall while reading the book? Like, did you have any sort of like set feeling that the book brought?
I mean, it was dark. I felt like there was a lot of that good versus evil. What else did, the power versus powerless,
Hmm.
um, making choices. There was just a lot about, having to make choices and finding your identity, the meaning of loyalty, because there's so much. I guess that was also another thing that was sad, is that so many people that Dora thought people she thought she could count on, um, really were like they were setting her up, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there was just a lot going on with that, and just the symbolism, it really made you stop and think about the whole reason why they named her Door, and what does a door represent? I have a whole thing about that.
I
Just
like
gonna
that.
say. I do. Like, doors represent a lot of things. So I
Mhm.
don't know. I felt like it was, and then the social commentary, which is a question that you did ask about, that,
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily realize until you posed. I was like, yeah, that's where the power and the powerless come in here,
Hmm. Yeah.
kind of
And
thing.
that'll actually be something up soon, I promise. For me, also, I didn't want to interrupt you. I'm so sorry.
Now, no, you're
Are
good.
you ready
You
for
didn't.
me?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay, cool.
I'm
Sorry. I
sorry.
was like, man, I didn't cut I hope I didn't cut her off. But one of so the thing for me in the book that made the story the most real was actually the loss of anesthesia,
Oh,
the
yes, I
the rat
forgot.
girl.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
forgot.
and I did, I saw some other people, Robert
Mm,
and, Jamie and, Rebecca all were saying, like,
mhm,
Richard having bad feelings about anesthesia. That actually gutted me because
mhm,
they're crossing this night bridge and she's like holding his hand and is like, we're gonna make it over the other side, we're gonna have to face our nightmares
mhm.
and everything. And he emerges on the other end with Hunter and anesthesia's just gone. And he turns around and he's like, well, we got to go back to get her. And Hunter goes, what are you gonna do? Like, how are you going to do that? And he looks into the darkness and he realizes that there is absolutely nothing he can do and
Right.
he has to leave. And I was actually shocked when that moment in the book happened because I was thinking like, oh, Richard is going to have a heroic moment. He's going to go in, he's out of his depth. I mean, like we can say throughout the entire book, Richard is completely out of
Right.
his depth. And I'm like, he's going to go back in there and he's going to try to find her and it's going to be okay. And he doesn't because he
Mm-mm,
can't. He doesn't know what to do, which
mm-mm.
follows the truth of his character. And Hunter also can't help. And so I spent the rest of the book being like, is Gaiman going to bring anesthesia back? Because there is
Well,
a character who comments like, well, sometimes they come back. And I was like, oh, is she going to return?
yeah, but
And
to me, I'm glad he didn't in a way
yeah,
because it's more realistic and it I think it fuels Richard to make other decisions later on to kind of honor her and
yeah,
ultimately what her happening to her and her not making it really represented for Richard. And the thing about it is it was a little bit different with Richard helping Dor in London Above because he was in a familiar place. Whereas
hmm,
in London Below, he has no clue. And we know he has fears. There's all kinds of fears,
yeah,
whether they're rational or not. Really and truly, helping Dor was probably one of the biggest things he ever did to get out of his comfort zone ever.
yeah,
But that just tells you what kind of a person Richard is. And I think he feels it and he probably felt guilt about it. But at the same time, I'm glad Gaiman did not, because to me, sometimes, as much as you don't want a character to die and you're kind of mad at a author when they do it,
hmm.
to me, it was a more realistic for it to happen that way.
I completely agree. I think it would have been cheap if he would have gone back on that, and I appreciate that he didn't. And in
Mhm.
terms of my happy moment, I was really happy that despite the fact that the Marquis, spoiler, actually dies, that he came up with a whole plan to bring himself back to life. I was like, dang, that's cool because
Well, you
he
knew
just had
that
planned
because
it
he gave the little box. I
to
kept
Old Bailey.
wondering what was in that
Yes,
box. And then
payoff,
finally, I was
payoff.
like, aha moment. I was like, it
Yes.
was like you could hear it. Ah, da, da, da.
Yes, I love it so much when authors do that, where they present something at the beginning of the book where you're just like, "Oh, that I can't tell whether that's important. It might not ever come up again later." And then they bring
Well,
it back and you're like, "Hey, you remember that thing I talked about at the beginning of the book? Well, guess what? It was actually extremely important." And that showed that the Marquis he had been planning for something horrible to happen to him for all this time.
mhm.
And I absolutely loved that. Not I don't I'm not happy he died. I mean, obviously
No,
he was
no, because
tortured. Like that's
yes, he was
terrible.
tortured and it was
Yeah.
terrible. But I loved also that it was Old Bailey that had the box, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so Old Bailey was frightened of the box, like, he
Yes. I
didn't
don't want
like
it.
it, and
I don't
so the
want it.
whole thing I loved how Gaiman did that, how he didn't make it seem like, "Okay, I'm the keeper of the box." It was
Uh-uh.
sorta like he was afraid and he was frightened of it, so you as the reader are not thinking it's going to be what the outcome ends up being,
Right.
'cause I never in a million years, like, it took me a while, and then all of a sudden I was like, "Oh, clever."
Yeah, it was clever. I liked it. And that leads into like the overall emotion I had for the book. If you can say that intrigue is an emotion, I was intrigued for most of the story because I kept wondering, I'm like, where is the
Mhm,
payoff?
mhm,
What is
mhm.
going to happen? Like what, and that's something that's my motivation to keep reading.
Mhm.
is I have to be engaged with it. And so it wasn't that I felt like happy or sad. It was mostly just what the hell is going on and what is
Right.
going to happen next.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
like that. That's the fun part of weird books. So, but yeah, I do want to go ahead and because I know we keep dancing around it, I'll go ahead and like talk about ask you about the themes because this is like such like this is arguably the most important part of the story and the reason why Gaiman ended up writing it in the first place. So, what did you think about the theme of falling through the cracks and how that relates to dispossessed people?
Okay, well, first of all, I think that Gaiman did a great job of
Mhm.
showing this with the London Below.
Mhm.
And I think that Richard's experience when he returns after his first visit really does, for me as the reader, that kind of gave me the hint that this is what we were going to kind of, I mean, I knew that there was a separation, London above, London below. And I knew that there were some little hints along the way when Richard meets some people outside the bars and all that kind of stuff. And then also Jessica's, you know, reaction to Door. But it was when he came back and he was kind of like a non-person at that point that it really did cement it for me.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of what it was showing you is that, London Below is this magical, fantastical world, but it's also where people go because they're not accepted by society, like you would be more so like in London above. So a lot of times when we don't like things or we don't want to look at things that make us uncomfortable or we fear or we're just ignorant of it, so it causes us to have fear, where do people or creatures go? They
Yeah.
go to hide, you know? And so that is what London Below was, the place where people who don't have a place in society necessarily, but they could be themselves in London Below. And that's where you see the magical and the fantastical. I mean, you even have characters who are not even human down there, you
Mhm.
know? And I
Mhm.
almost wondered if, like, the non human characters who were, personified down in London Below represented a certain type of characteristic in a person, you know, the rats, the elephant, the sheepdogs,
Mhm.
you know, they had human qualities, but they were really kind of animals. So it's almost like, were they not even, do people look at the homeless and people who are like on the margins of society as not human, more animals? I don't know. That's maybe I'm like not on the right track with that, but
I didn't think about that perspective, but I like where you're taking that. I One of the things I appreciated is like the largest metaphor of the story is the fact that the characters, from London Below are invisible, right? Like they're actually
yes.
in this universe truly invisible to people. They have to scream to even like get anybody to notice them, and even after that, they immediately forget. And I think that that's such a clear metaphor for the fact that people who are dispossessed, who are homeless, who are down on their luck, who are like the lowest members of society are invisible to us in our real lives, not because we can't see them, but because we choose not to, because it's a lot easier to ignore things that are ugly, that are hard,
Hmm.
that we
Hmm.
don't want to acknowledge because we either feel that we can't help or we don't want to, or it's like, I just want to go back to my life and not think about them. And then,
Hmm.
what do? You see a person who's homeless on the side of the street, and then you go home and then you try to like put them out of your mind and like move on with your life, right? Because like, what am I going to do to help them?
Hmm.
And I think that that was very clear that the reason why they were invisible was because people who are carrying on with their lives, the people who are doing well, don't want to see them.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think that that
And I
is
think
like,
that's what Jessica is a perfect example of that.
yes,
With the whole
yes,
situation on the sidewalk with Door, and how she doesn't have time for it because the things in her life are more important. And here you have a person that is bleeding near
Mhm.
death in front of you. And then it was that point where she was just like, okay, we'll just like call like 911 or the ambulance or whatever, and let's just
Right.
go, like, do
Yep.
that and let's keep going, kind of
Mhm.
thing. So yes, and I think it really hit home when Richard comes back, because I think that's what makes him realize at that point too, that
Mhm.
I don't think Richard was a person that he wasn't on the same level as Jessica, but still he had his moments too. And I think he had to reconcile that when he came back the first
Mhm.
time.
Yeah, so one of I took the themes of this book pretty personally, because when I used to live in Lexington, for those of you who are not in the United States, that's in Kentucky. And Lexington has a pretty high homeless population. And I mean, you could say that's the same for any major city. I mean, there's
Mhm,
unfortunately a lot of homeless people in the United States. But one of the things that struck me about this book is the way that people from London below are depicted with their mentality. Like
mhm,
the fact that there's something that's not quite right about them, like there's something you can tell that they're off, that they're strange. And one of the unfortunate realities of actual homelessness is the fact that many people on the streets have mental issues.
mhm,
They were people who were, in the case of Lexington, they used to have hospitals that people would stay in, and they were government funded. And then the government shut them down, and they just put all those people out on the street, and they didn't have anywhere to go. And so, this idea of, people scrounging for food and, building like this sense of community with one another, having a barter system, like those are all things that actually happen. Like that's not just like, oh, we're creating a cool,
mhm,
underground narrative where people don't have currency. It's like, no, it's because like homeless people don't have money, right?
right,
Because if they had money, they wouldn't be homeless.
mhm,
So, this idea of, the trade and also the differences, I found really fascinating between like the types of dispossessed people. So, Old Bailey, for example, had an intense phobia of the underground, which is why he wanted to live on the rooftops, even though he was by himself. For all intents and purposes, he was alone, didn't want community with anybody because he didn't want to live in the underground. And then you have people like the sewer crew, the sewer people who like just fish in the sewers all day long to find something to be able to sell at the markets, and they don't really talk, and they smell terrible, and they're even ostracized by other, London below people.
mhm,
And I found the layers of the society and the way that Gaiman depicted everybody, um, I don't know, very true to life, because I would interact with the homeless people in Lexington. Like I fed them. Like I'm one of those
mhm,
people. Like if somebody comes to me and they say that they're hungry, I can't not feed them.
right.
So I ended up talking to people when I lived there, and I don't mean this with any amount of disrespect whatsoever, but none of the people I ever talked to were quite right, if that makes sense in terms of
Mhm,
like
mhm.
their mentality.
Well, I
Like
mean, I will tell you, mental health in the United States it's atrocious how we do not have more resources
yeah.
for people with mental health issues. And I say that just because my mom was diagnosed with dementia. And while there's a lot of research and they do have, you go to the hospital and you do all these things, there's a lot of things associated with dementia that impacts mental health. It's not
Hmm.
just, memory loss. There's other things that's attributed to that, and to see how it's handled and just what my mom had to go through initially before we even got her diagnosis was appalling to me,
Hmm.
because they took psychiatric wards out of hospitals. You don't have
Hmm.
that anymore in hospitals, at least not in Louisiana. You don't. And so you have a lot of private mental facilities,
Yep.
and I'm not I'm not impressed. I'm just gonna
No.
say I'm not impressed at all. And I do
No.
have friends that have had similar situations, either with their children having mental health struggles, or a family member that's not even related to dementia, and to hear their horror stories and what they have to go to, and what these people want help. They don't want to be ostracized or feel like they're damaged goods because they have something in their wiring that they can't help. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? And
Absolutely.
so when you think about a lot of the issues that we have in our world, a lot of them can be solved, but people don't want to solve them. People who
Yeah.
have the ability to solve them don't want to. You know what
No.
I'm saying?
They
So
don't wanna pay the money. They don't wanna give the funding
right.
to
So
be able to do
it makes
that.
me
Yeah.
really it did. I overall I would say, you know, he did a really great job of showing the differences. Just as you have different levels of socioeconomic tiers in London above or in a society above, it's the same with London below. You're going to have the same socioeconomic situations depending on what you have to bring to the table, you
Mhm.
know? So, yeah, it very powerful. I don't think a lot of people, I think people going into this, and I mean, I was guilty of it. I thought this was just going to be a little fantasy, you know,
Yeah,
dark
I know.
fantasy with some horror elements and
Yes.
that, and it really does make you think about it. And Gaiman does that. Gaiman does that throughout the books that I've read, you know,
Yeah,
and it's subtle, but it's there if
I
you're
agree.
open your eyes to it.
Yeah, yeah, if you have an open heart to that kind of thing, which I definitely think that we do, when talking about this, and like I said, I did take the book pretty personally, and that actually leads me into another question that I had that's in a similar vein, which is, when Richard undergoes the ordeal, which is like a super traumatic part of the book for
Mhm,
him,
mhm.
what did you think about that section of the book and the implication that everything that he experienced was just an illusion made up by a sick mind?
Like him being sick?
Yeah, because in that part of the story, Richard, he goes in and he walks in to do the ordeal in order to get the key for Islington,
Oh,
right?
oh, oh.
And he ends up walking and he kind of stumbles upon this train station and he starts to see people that he knows in his life and they're telling him like, "Oh, we're just figments of your imagination. You've actually
Right, right,
gone
right, right,
crazy.
right,
Sorry,
right. Mhm.
Richard." Um,
Well, I think that little break of reality is probably something that I mean, I kinda considered it kinda like trauma, like, you know, you lived through a traumatic experience, here you are back where you wanna be, and now you have to try to kinda assimilate back into a life that you were leading after going through something so horrific. So it's almost like your mind, I guess his mind in my sense probably was trying to protect him from that, maybe? From trauma? I don't know,
I
it was kind of confusing. That was one of the parts that was kind of confusing to me because
Okay.
I'm like, "Please don't tell me that this was like a dream." Because at first I
No.
thought that. At first I was like, "Is he gonna wake up in his bed and this is gonna be some kind of a dream thing?" Then I'm gonna be really aggravated. Then I probably
Yeah,
would have not given it a 4 for
yeah,
sure.
no, no, I think that that part of the book was extremely like, that to me was probably the most traumatizing part of the book, and I'm gonna be talking a little bit about, suicide here, so trigger warning for people, but,
Mhm,
um, in that moment when Richard goes in and he's trying to handle the ordeal, and he is basically put into a situation where like everybody else who's ever had to go through the ordeal has been through the exact same thing. It's the reason why nobody ends up surviving it.
right.
And it's because they're put in a situation where they're made to think that they've gone crazy. Richard, is talking to illusions of himself. They turn to putty when he touches their
Mhm,
faces, and
mhm, mhm,
he's given a troll doll that he had on his desk back in his real life, and he kind of is realizing about himself that he's got like boils on his face, and he's
mhm,
like dirty, and his nails are they're covered in something disgusting, and like he's just unclean, and he's kind of become what a lot of people depict as like somebody who is actually homeless, and then
mhm,
he's being
mhm,
made to believe that everything that he's been
mhm,
through is a figment of his imagination. And so, well, if all of this is a figment and you've lost your mind, and oh well, also nobody cares about you and
mhm,
everybody hates
mhm,
you, so why don't you kill yourself? That's literally what the ordeal was trying to get him to do. It was trying to
mhm,
get him to walk out in front of the train and just end it all. And the fact that that is an actual reality, not obviously not, the ordeal is not real in our world, but
right.
homelessness and what that does to people and the very high degree of mortality. Like when you think of homelessness, you might think that, oh, well, the reason why people die is because they get sick and they can't get medical care, they freeze to death. And like, yes, all of those things are true. But there is also the fact that there is a high suicide rate among people who are homeless. And I think that that's what Gaiman was getting at in that moment is like that is a devastating reality for people to wake up one day and realize that their life is like over or they're not quite right in the head, like they're never going to get their life back. So what is there for them anymore? Like
Right.
you
Or
might
they've
as well.
just totally lost hope.
Yeah, exactly.
So
And
what's
so
the point?
that was so hard for me to read because
Mhm.
that's real for a lot of people. And obviously
Mhm.
Richard made it out. He recognized, and it was like anesthesia's voice he thought he heard, being like, "Get on the train, Richard, like just hold on." And he makes it through. But the fact that he was that close. He was that close to
Right.
just, dying because he didn't feel like it was worth it anymore.
Mhm.
And that was
Mhm.
a really, in my opinion, powerful part of the book.
Well, I'm glad you explained it to me because that makes me feel a little bit better because I was like very confused about there was some parts in here I was confused and I'm just like I don't know if this happened with you. It took me a moment trying to get the back and forth, like you were with this character for like a couple of paragraphs, then back with this character, and then like trying to get my
Your
sea legs,
bearings.
I guess, my
Your bearings.
bearings. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like
Did your book have breaks in it? Like
they
good.
did.
Okay.
They did, but it was the only difference would be there would be a space and then like the first four words were like in a gray. So,
Okay.
yeah, I don't know that kind of that back and forth. And like I said, I think the audiobook, I don't know, I needed to read it with my eyeballs, I think, to digest it a little bit better because of the breaks, the way it was so back and forth. Because it was quick. It wasn't like it was like a chapter related to one person and then a
Right.
chapter going into that. Like it could be
Mhm.
within the same chapter, you went back and forth about, 20 times.
See, I did not have the audiobook at all. I think that benefited me a lot
Oh, yeah, I think so.
because I didn't listen to any of this. I don't
Mhm.
typically listen to books though. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I I would recommend if at like any part of the book to go back and read, it might be that one, just because it's a pretty powerful part of the book.
Mhm, mhm.
But yeah, I liked it a lot. I thought it had a lot of meaning. I don't
I
like
almost
obviously
thought
what it
it was like, well,
implied,
no,
but it
I
was
almost
meaningful.
right, but I almost thought it was like a dream sequence, and I'm like, I hope he's not gonna go with that because that drives me crazy.
Yeah, no. No, no, it's all the black friars or the black priests, excuse me. Yeah, but to talk about something that's a little less dark, that's the darkest part of the book that we're gonna
Mhm.
talk about. Definitely wanted to touch on those themes. I wanted to ask about, the thing really that happens towards the beginning of the book is that Richard has the ability to see Door, which we've touched on. And why do you think that Richard could see her, and why could Jessica see Richard at the party?
Hmm. I kind of thought about this a little bit, and I just kind of felt like Richard could see Door because Richard had seen people who are on the margins of society. He has that interaction with the homeless lady before he even
Beginning of the
takes the
book.
job. Okay. So
Yes.
that's kind of like gives you a little bit insight into his heart and what he
Mhm.
thinks. And I just think he's not a person like I guess is like he's not an overly ambitious person and he doesn't have to have the fineness of everything and that because he he doesn't the clothes that he wears for Jessica are clothes that Jessica buys for him. She's always trying to buy him books about being this better or whatever person,
Yep.
kind of thing. But I think that Richard's personality, he's a kind soul. And I think he knows his struggles that I feel like he's the type of person that he's had to work hard or he may have had struggles at some point. I just get that impression from him.
Mhm.
And so I think he has empathy. He's a very, has a lot of empathy for people. And so I think that's
Yes.
why he could see her. As for Jessica at the party, I couldn't quite figure it out. It's like she kind of recognized him, but it was almost like she recognized it as being a disruption, but she really didn't see him. Like it was like somebody being like on the tip of your tongue kind of thing.
Yep. Yep.
But it was
Mhm.
almost like a distraction, and so then it kinda made me kinda go full circle, like a back around or circle back around, not full circle, but to go back to how she was with him when they were together,
Mhm.
that Richard was kind of like maybe a distraction for her, like her little project of trying to make him something that he wasn't,
Mhm.
to fit in her perfect little world.
Do
I
you
don't
think
know, I
that
could be
could be a
wrong.
metaphor for how she didn't really see him in their relationship? Like, she didn't
Yeah,
really see him as a person, it
I
was
think
more of
that's
just like
awesome. Yes,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
perfect.
I
Yeah,
think that makes a lot of sense, and I completely agree with you about the reason why he could see Dor, because Dor even ends up asking the question, like, "Why was I sent to you, of all people?" Like, "I don't know," and she even admits to him, she's like, "I don't know why you were the one who was chosen, but I just asked for help, and that help gave me you."
right.
And, I think it's just because of all of the people that could have helped in London, he had some sort of predisposition in his heart that he would care enough to try to help. Um, and I think that, the implication could also be that that means that there's a lot more people out there who wouldn't, right? That, like, Richard is a rarity because he would want to help. And, I think that could mean something else about society too.
Yes. Yes, because there are a lot of people that talk the talk but don't walk the walk.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. 100%. Absolutely. And yeah, do you think we did kinda touch on this, but do you think that Jessica really loved Richard? Because I think that in her
Um,
own way.
I know you probably can hear
Oh,
Luna.
it's
I
okay.
don't know
No,
if my
it's
husband is home or not.
you're good.
He's
You're
at the
totally
front
good.
door.
It's not loud. I mean, I
Okay.
can hear Luna, but it's not terrible. But but yeah, I think Jessica, in her own way, loved him, like, the best way that she could for being this, like, very particular person who wanted, like, a very specific dynamic in her
Mhm.
relationship, but I don't think it was that she didn't care about him. I do
No,
think
no,
it was
no,
that she
no.
didn't see him, like, for who he was and didn't appreciate who he was and his own qualities.
Well, not until the end. Remember, she
Right.
does, she has
Yes.
a revelation at the end, and the what makes that to you that she kind of realizes what she lost is the fact that he corrects himself and calls her Jess, and then, oh, Jessica, I know you don't like that kind of thing. And she was like, Jess is fine.
Mhm.
Sort of like, I think she also realized that her rigidity and the things in her life, what she was placing emphasis on, you got to compromise, you got to meet in the middle, and I don't think she was so much willing to do that. It was almost like she tolerated him,
Yeah.
but it was sad to me. Like, even he didn't even meet her parents, or if he met the parents, it was like kind of like I can't remember. Did he meet the parents?
He
And it was
did,
like
and they said that they
weird.
didn't like him.
Yes, and yes, that's what it was. I'm trying to remember. Um, Yeah, because I just read a book, and the person who was married or dating somebody didn't meet the parents, so that's what I was thinking of. But
No, you're good.
yeah, so I think I kind of wonder if Jessica and Richard, like if there was a sequel, if Jessica and Richard will get together.
Well, at this point, Jessica would have to come to London Below because Richard isn't around anymore. So I don't think so,
You don't
personally.
think?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No,
Well,
I think that it was him at the end of the book when, he's getting the ring from her and he gives it back and goes, I've changed as a person. That was him being like the finality of like, I recognize that we aren't meant to be together. I'm different now.
yeah. I mean, I kind of think it's she deserves it, honestly, because
Yeah.
she had a good guy.
Yeah.
But I also, I like a happy ending sometimes too.
I do. I do too. I agree
And
with
especially
that.
if she could see the error of her ways and could come around to it. I don't know.
That's fair. That's very fair. I no, I get that. I really do. Um, was were you unhappy with the ending, or did you like it? Like, was there something that you had an expectation that would occur and then it didn't, or vice versa?
I don't know. I kind of thought he was just going to go back to his life and then do more for
Mm,
the people that were in London above. That's what
okay.
I thought was going to happen. I mean, honestly, like because of what he experienced and I think he got it. I think he got the differences between where he was at. Um, but is it more realistic in the sense of who Richard had become? I mean, would he have ever really been able to? I mean, I think Richard could have done some good for people who are, needed the help, homeless people. I think he could have helped, but I don't know how many people he could have helped. I don't know how many people he could have convinced to help. Or maybe Richard needed the excitement and the adventure because he caught the bug of it towards the end. I mean, he survived that.
He did. Yeah. I think that after
I don't know.
his whole ordeal and his trial, London Below was kind of demystified in a way. Like he was finally starting to believe in it and recognize that
Yes,
maybe he could live there.
yes, because for so long he did.
He no, it's like this is all an illusion. That was the one part of him that I was getting annoyed about was every time somebody would say something, he'd be like, "Well, that doesn't exist. That can't be real." And it's like, Richard, believe your eyes. And there's the one part of the book where he's like, I think I'm finally starting to put the doubts away and I'm starting to recognize that the things that I'm seeing are actually in front of me. And it's like, yeah, Richard, you
Yeah,
probably could have done
finally.
that from the beginning because it took like 3/4 of the book for him to do that. um, but yeah, I honestly, with the way that the story was going, I kind of expected that there was going to be some sort of romance between Richard and Dor. And saying that, I'm glad that there wasn't.
I am
I'm
too.
actually happy that they ended as friends because I thought it was more meaningful. He didn't end the book with like some sort of romantic, like, yay, I found my person. He's literally
Right.
going back to be with people that he now has as friends.
Right. Right. Yes, I am so glad. I think I would have been mad. I would have been mad if he and Dora would have gotten together because I don't know. I didn't think that was realistic.
No, they
I
didn't
think
mesh.
Richard, they did
No.
not. Um, in fact, to me, they were more like buddy buddy or brother sister, kind of
Yes.
like, like
Yeah.
I'm here for you and I'm gonna help you through this kind of thing. And I think they were good for each other as far as they needed each other. Even though Dora is very strong and strong willed and capable, and she does have magic, I, she was vulnerable many times.
Yes.
And she needed Richard as much as Richard needed her. So I did like that. I would have been really angry. I've been like, that's like the word you use, cheap. I think that would have been
Cheap.
cheap.
Yeah, I love using that word when I describe something in a book that I'm like that you knew that that was a cheap decision, that it was
Mhm,
something that like you took the easy way out. That's
mhm,
usually when I describe something as cheap, it's like it's because you picked the thing that was easy. And I
yeah,
think honestly, and that it's one of the reasons I'm resistant to reading certain types of books. I don't think everything has to end in a romance. Like not
no,
everybody
no,
has to be with somebody in the end. Sometimes you can just have people that are important to you in your life. And I thought that this book embodied that. And if anything, it ended with less romance than when it began,
it did. And
which is
and the other
cool.
thing too is, I mean, I was pleasantly surprised. I say pleasantly. I don't know if pleasantly is the word. I was surprised by the ending. I honestly could not see Richard going back, considering because of his confidence and everything that he had went through, things were really looking up for him in his life. And he
Yeah.
maybe not would have been with Jessica, but he could have been with someone else. They
Mhm.
went to the bar, he had his friend Gary, and it just seemed like he was in a good place, but that maybe he could do some good in London above. that is kind of like the direction I thought it was going to go in with that. So I was surprised by that. I was also surprised by who was there to greet him.
The marquee. Oh, I was so happy about, "Are you coming?" Like, I love that. I love that so much, and I kind of wonder if, there again, there could be, like, some sort of metaphor there of the reason why, even though Richard well, I'll frame it this way. Richard made it out of being homeless, okay? I'll phrase it that way.
Mhm, mhm.
He made it out of being homeless. He got a job. He had a home. He had, like, not only got the job and got a home, but got upgraded ones to what he
I
had.
loved how he stood up for himself.
Yeah. And so, like, really, you're right. His life was looking up. It looked like he was going to be able to have everything he wanted and more. Maybe he didn't end with a romance, but he could find somebody else, as you
Mhm,
said.
mhm.
Um, so why did he go back when clearly London below, like, they have terrible food, the living conditions are squalid, there's nowhere to shower, like all of that. Do you think that there's a chance that it could be a metaphor for, like, people who make it out of homelessness, who make it out of poverty, who get to the point where they are successful, that they can't ever really forget that part of their life, like it's part of them now?
It's possible, but I think, Richard faced his fears. That was one thing. He was a very fearful person going
Mhm.
in, and I think he was fearful even in London Above with certain things. He didn't wanna rock the boat. I mean, he was still kind of unsure about even the whole thing with Jessica breaking up with him. Like, would she really break up with me kinda thing, and really worried about that. And, so I think he faced his fears for one thing. I think that he was more confident. And even though London Below is scary and you have all these unusual and interesting characters down there, um, I think Richard enjoyed the excitement. I think he enjoyed the adventure. I think he loved being with Dor and the friends that he made there. And I think they were real friends to him, more so than what he felt that he had above, because it didn't seem like, except for Gary, you really didn't know any of his other friends. Did he have any other friends?
He
No, it was just
didn't,
the
other
one
than
from work,
Jessica. Yeah,
Jessica and Gary, you know? So
yeah.
I think he had no one was really there to change him, like in the sense of, you could be who you want to be. You need to kind of toughen up a little bit, not be so
Mhm,
scared about everything. Like, don't jump every time you see a shadow. Be scared of Mr. Croup and Mr. Vandermar because they're
mhm,
scary people or
mhm.
whatever they were. But I don't know. It's like he really even started appreciating like the rats and where
Yeah.
the rats fit into society.
The way he
And
talks to them, and
yes,
when he's back in London Above, and he's like, "Hi, I I used to talk to you all, and, I knew Dor, and, Lady Dor and everything," and people are looking at him like he's crazy, like, "Why is this guy talking to rats?" And it's like, "No, it's 'cause he views them as," he's like, "They're people, like, they have their own language and their own culture," and, I do think that, of course, London Below is way more exciting than I've been to London. I've been there, and London
I love
Below sounds way
London.
more exciting than anything that could possibly happening in, London Above,
Well,
for sure.
London Below, it just like, just the fantastical and the magic and, you know, I don't know, it's just mystifying and mysterious.
But it
You
was
know, I mean,
also gross.
well, it was gross. I wouldn't
It
like the
was
gross part,
super
but there were
gross.
parts that weren't gross. I mean, they could go live somewhere like the Friars or whatever.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, they could go live in a nice place. They could make a nice place. I mean, Dora didn't live in a gross place.
True, but her home was magical. It, like, built, by her grandfather, and all these rooms taken from different places that they
I
could,
thought
like,
that was
teleport
so
to.
cool.
That was really cool. I wish we had gotten to see more of that, now that I think about it. So, yeah, you're right. There are places that aren't gross, but man, there was so much of it that was. So
I think the main thing that would be, like, scary for me would be the, food, like, not knowing
yeah,
exactly what you were eating.
the sausages and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, like, what was it really made of?
Yeah.
Was that like a
Yeah.
rat sausage or
Yeah, food's a big part of my life. I don't think I could probably handle that even if the curry was good, just saying. 'Cause that's what they enjoyed eating, was the curry.
so what about door? What about I want to talk about like doors in general. I
Okay.
just found that fascinating that doors, that's a big, huge symbol. And then
Mhm.
you have a character who's named Door who can
Mhm.
manifest a door. She can make a door, she could create one, or she can open a door and she doesn't need a key. So I kind of was thinking about this and how, all the sayings like when you close a door, another one opens. I don't know if it's another door or window or whatever, but it kind of makes me want, think about transitioning in your life or like having a life event that closes a chapter, in your life. And then you need to start something else. So if you like close a door on that, or like I was thinking about this too, because I follow Gretchen Rubin. She's a writer, and her daughter, her youngest daughter, just went to college, and she was trying to come up with another way to say empty nest. She's like, I would like another way of saying that than be an empty nest, something a little more hopeful and positive. So she came up with open door,
Mm.
because her door has opened up for her to step out and go do different things in her life because she no longer has a child at home. So that's going to open up possibilities to her. So to me, that's like a life event,
Mhm.
that has happened, her daughter going to college. So and then you kind of like transitioning from one stage of your life into another stage, or it could be that you're transitioning just from one moment to another. It could be like your state of being, I guess, kind of thing. But also I think doors, when you think about it, you can close your door when you need to have private time. Like, like you can have your private moment and then you can have your public moment. like I know if is that weird or what? I mean,
No, no, I
like
don't
your
think that's weird.
professional life and your personal life. Like when you leave your office or wherever I know when I leave my little Title I classroom, I close my door. I don't
Mhm.
think about that anymore, really. And then
Mhm.
I open my door at home and I go in and I'm doing my things in my house, kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So I kind of look at it like that way. And then also choices. Sometimes you're presented with all these choices.
Mhm.
Don't they have games and stuff where what's behind door number one? What's behind
Yes.
door number two? Why
Yes,
do
they
they
do.
do that? Because you have a choice.
Mhm. It's all
Be a
about the
good choice, could be the
possibilities.
bad choice. Yes. Anyway, I
Yeah.
just loved all of that. And I love that, we ourselves, sometimes we need a key to open a door, sometimes we don't.
I really love where you went with that because I didn't I know I mean it because I didn't think about that and I didn't include that in any
Oh,
of my questions. So I'm glad that you brought that up because door is the literal and figurative door for Richard into the London below. Like literally without her, he never would have experienced it. He wouldn't have known that it ever existed. And so, her opening up this doorway to come into his life, he was presented with this opportunity to help her or not. So this was his moment. A door is open to
mhm.
him. You can take whichever path you want.
Choice. Yes.
He takes it, decides to help her, and now like this entire floodgate has opened for him of like every possible thing that of decisions and choices and lives that he could live that he didn't know about prior. And Dor also is she's the closing character for him as well because she takes the key that
Mhm.
is the key to reality and turns it for him and pops him back into his old life. And she is, yes, she is a character named Door, and yes, she can open doors, but she is a literal door for Richard
Right, right,
as
right,
well.
right.
So yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So I just found that very fascinating. The more I thought about it, I was like, we might not think of doors in that way, but there's so many ways to, you know,
Hmm. That's awesome. What were you shocked? Speaking of doors, because this is important. That's actually a great transition. Were you shocked by the twist that Islington was the antagonist all along rather than the
Oh my
Marquis? What
gosh.
did you think
Yes.
about that?
Well, I loved the exchange when they were talking about, but he's an angel. He
Uh-huh.
couldn't possibly, and then someone brought up, I can't remember who it was. Well, Lucifer was an angel too. And
Yep.
he yes, I was totally shocked by that. Islington ended up being a shyster, such a terrible character. Could not believe, that uh, you know, acting like he was a friend to the family, and that the father said to go.
Mhm.
My heart broke at that moment because of the deceit, and also to Hunter.
Oh yeah, that was another question I had too. Like I want to also
Hunter.
we'll also be talking about Hunter. Yeah.
So I was pleasantly surprised about the Marquis, and actually was kind of like cheering, even though he was
Yeah.
like, the Marquis reminds me of somebody else, another literary character, or someone I've seen in a movie or a show, where you're just like not too sure about where the loyalty lies. And that's what I was going to say about the Marquis. You find out that the Marquis is a loyal person. Yes, he's out for himself, but he also is a man of his word, that if he tells you he's going to do something, he's going to do it. Now, of course, you owe him a favor, but
Yeah.
he he could have he didn't have to necessarily go down to see the assassins.
Oh God, no. He didn't have to get himself killed.
No.
He did that to learn information. He literally died and had to come back in order to try to learn on behalf of Door like what was actually going on. And I was so appreciative. I cannot even begin to tell you how appreciative I was that the Marquis was not actually the bad guy because I had that I'm like I'm going through the book and I'm like he can't actually be because that would be too obvious and then it keeps going and I'm like is he actually like did Gaiman really make him the obvious bad guy? And when it came out that it's like, no, he's not. Islington is actually the big bad of the
Yeah,
story. I was like,
I
that's so
just
good.
I couldn't believe it. I just didn't think it was true.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm happy that he didn't cheap out. I'm gonna keep saying that he didn't cheap out. Um and I like that we see Islington go from being just this composed, angel talking about Atlantis and like, oh, well, I'm so sad because I couldn't save them and everything. And then by the end of the book, they use the word it. I don't know why they kept referring to Islington as an it. I would have figured it would be a they because Islington was androgynous. So when I say it, I don't like it, but that's the way that it's phrased in the book.
I
Um,
thought at one time though they said he, so that's why I was
that
like confused.
yeah,
And then I was like, well, maybe they call it because it's an angel, and an
yeah, because it's
angel
supposed to
isn't
be
a
sex.
human.
Yeah, they're supposed to be sexless, like they don't have a gender, and I
But
think
I
that's why they
thought
were
there
saying
was someone that they
it.
did.
Mr. Croup did. Mr.
Okay,
Croup called
okay. I was
Islington he.
like,
Yeah,
because the whole time I was thinking, okay, well, I mean, it makes sense to me because it's an angel, and an angel would be an it. It's not a person. It doesn't have a human form. I mean, well, it could be a human form, but it's not a human.
yeah.
You
I
know what
I
I'm saying?
like yeah, I like that we see Islington lose his their its shit, at the end of the book when,
Yeah.
they're talking about Atlantis and, he goes, "Well, they deserved it," and his face, like, contorts, and in my book, actually, that expression is, sketched out, and you
Oh,
see,
you
like,
need to
how
show us. You need to
it's
show
like let
us.
me see if I can find it, but, it's you go from seeing this, like, perfectly coiffed angel to being, like, kind of awful looking, and you realize, like, how mean and nasty Islington really is deep down, and, that's why I love so much that Door found a way to trick Islington, like that
Yes.
she went to the Hammersmith and was like, "Hey, Hammersmith," and we think that he's just making her a chain for her key, but it turns out that
Mhm.
he actually made a copy of the key, which I did not expect at all, and I thought was
Which
great.
was very clever.
Yes. Um, what did you think it was interesting that a door managed to open up like a portal basically to like somewhere out in space? I was not expecting that at all.
Was
I was like
that either?
really got sucked out into space, like on the other side of the Milky Way or whatever. That was cool.
So you almost wonder where all her doors that she can open leads to, you know?
Hmm.
If it could be out of space, couldn't it also be in an ocean?
Oh yeah. Yeah, but she just wanted to pick like the furthest possible realm away. So this is Islington in like looking nice, okay? Just like
Oh,
first
like,
appearance of
yeah, being
Angel,
benevolent or just
benevolent.
being yeah.
And then his or its face gets contorted in the margins. And that's when
Yeah.
it goes like insane. And you can see how kind of like ugly and inhuman it
Yes.
looks.
When someone shows you who you are or who
Yeah.
they are, believe them.
Hmm. Yes. And I just thought that that was so awesome, and that does lead me into, and I'm glad that you brought it up. Did you think that Hunter's betrayal was out of character for her, and do you think that her actions at the end of her life redeemed her?
I was actually surprised. I really did think Hunter was on the up and up, especially, how Richard and Hunter meet. The fact that, Hunter is supposed to be a bodyguard to Door. However, she did seem to be conflicted. She seemed to be conflicted and kind of sad about her choice. But what made me sad about her was the fact that she knew that she was doing wrong. Did she grow to love? Well, not love might be too strong, but did she grow to care about Richard and Dor because of knowing, like getting to know them and then realize that she made a bad choice, but she had to continue going through it? So then she ended up redeeming herself, sort of like, okay, I was an ass and I made the wrong choice, and these people don't deserve to have what's going to happen to them. So I've got to do whatever it takes to try to make it right, kind of thing. So I don't know. At first, I was kind of like, I hate you because I
Yeah.
trusted you just as much as Dora and Richard did. I hate you. Why could you do that? So I'm glad that she had an opportunity to make a better choice. She sacrificed herself. She could have not done that. I mean, she could have just gone through it. She could have just left him high and dry and just went off her merry way. But then part of me thinks that if that would have happened, she would have been killed. So I almost wonder if, okay, I can die on my own terms. So if I'm going to die anyway, I can't walk away from this. I'm gonna at least try to go out in a blaze of glory.
Her whole thing about like the reason for her betrayal being it's for the thrill of the hunt, and it's because she needed that special spear to be able to go after the beast of London. I think that it was very fitting for her that that be the way that she died, because she even said to Richard at like, well, when I go after it, either it's going to die or I'm going to die, and that's what it is to be a hunter. And so I don't think that there's any point that she ever would have left them in the labyrinth, because her prey, everything that she wanted, the whole reason that she was with them was there. And her
That's a good point.
fortune, yeah, her fortune, if you will, of like, well, either it's going to die or I will. Well, sometimes it's both, right? Like, so they both died. But she did have that moment of wanting to redeem, and she says like, I did something terrible and
Mhm,
I'm going to make
mhm.
amends for this. Richard, take this spear and I'm going to basically distract it. But she knew she was going to die anyway. Like she
Right,
definitely
right,
was
right,
going.
right, right, right. Yeah.
But hate to say this, I absolutely think that it was within her character to betray them. And the reason why I say that is because we are presented to her. I also wanted to show you this artwork of her because she's very beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
That's Hunter. So, we are introduced to her as, she's helping Richard, and she even brings up, like, yeah, I saved your life multiple times and whatnot. And, when Richard asks her, well, what do you do? There's a whole comedic thing where he thinks that she's a prostitute, because she's like, well, I rent my body out to people who need me. And he's like, oh, she's a hooker, and it's like, no, but she shows up and she's
Uh,
competing for Door to, be the bodyguard. And what was so interesting about that interaction is, after she had won, like, they had already decided on her, the Marquis is like, okay, well, now, we're going to move on. And Hunter has this moment where she says, well, if I decide to take on your job. And the Marquis stops and he raises an eyebrow at her and goes, what do you mean if you decide? And she goes, because they'd already dismissed everybody else. And she goes,
right.
oh, well, I've decided to take it. What do we know about the London below above everything else that we've seen? Everything has a price. Everything
Yes,
you
that's
pay
true.
for,
Yes,
right? So,
yes.
like, you go and you barter with people. The Marquis is paid in favors, if not in, like, certain things. Hunter is at no point ever promised anything for her services, ever. And she never asks for anything. She's the only character aside from Richard who shows up. And Richard's just, he's like, oh shit, I don't know where else I could go. I want my old life back. So, like, she's the only one, though, from the London below who is not following that social contract. And so you can spend, like,
You are so smart. I
and
didn't
so,
catch that. I did not
yeah.
catch that.
And so then I looked at that after it was revealed, and I'm like, well, of course that makes perfect sense, because she already knew what her payment was. It was the
Yes.
spear.
Yes.
Um, and yeah, that whole thing, I thought was so perfectly put. In my opinion, I thought Gaiman did a really good job of that. It was very subtle. So
Yes, because I didn't catch that. I didn't even catch that at all. And that is very true. Ugh, that was a good
sorry.
comment.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I was just, like, over here ranting about Hunter. I was, like, so excited to
Well,
talk about
no, but it
that.
was just funny how Richard, like Robert's comment though, is hilarious. Richard thought you were a.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And, I just think that the way that we get introduced to these characters is so good. And do you hope that we will get a sequel with them?
I would love a sequel. I think it would be interesting to see what happens next for Richard. Like, or what other kind of adventures are they going to go on? And also, too, I ended up liking the Marquis de Carabas, and
Mhm.
I'd like to know, like, are they going to form like the A team of London Below?
Oh, I love
Kind of
that.
thing. Or
Yeah.
who else is out there that, is not, I mean, obviously somebody's got to take the place of the bad guys. You got to have other bad guys in London Below, right? Um, yeah, I think I would like it just because I enjoyed the characters. Richard ended up surprising me, because by the end, he finds purpose, he finds belonging, he really, finds his identity. I think, like, he discovers, you know, that an ordinary person like himself can actually do something, brave,
Mhm.
so I don't know. I loved his character development because he started off being this innocent person, just living his little simple life. And then you see him mature and become more experienced as he, goes on. I mean, part of it is, yes, you want to live, but there were so many times when he was on the cusp of dying, and I liked how he was able to face his fears. He just became a better person, I think. I don't know.
I
I
I
was
think
I
that
was
he did
rooting
too.
for him. I was rooting for Richard. And I liked Dor a lot, and I did like the Marquis. I liked Old Bailey even.
Yeah, he was sweet. He had a heart of gold, that old kook. He was great. And Heidi ended up asking the question, "What happened to the 2 goons?" They got blown out into space.
Yes, with the
That's what
angel.
happened. They got with the angel, they literally got sucked into space through a door, which I love.
Oh, yes.
I love that
I
so
like
much.
it, the 2 goons.
The 2 goons, yeah. Goodreads referenced a sequel, but it's not clear if it was ever released.
Oh.
It could be the short story, How the Marquis Got His Coat Back, which is something that, Kat and I do plan to discuss here in just a minute.
Well,
Um,
I mean, he kinda says like he wanted to revisit, but when you read the part about that, he says it's actually, in the story itself. Like, when it takes place
mhm,
in the story itself. I
mhm.
don't know if yours had an introduction to that in your book.
It had the introduction where it talked about the TV show and how the TV show was what came first, and then the
Right.
book
So
came second.
he said, let's see.
I don't know, Nicole said
It
book 2
takes
was The
place
Seven Sisters.
it says it takes place in the book you just read shortly after he loses his coat and his life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, okay, so, yeah,
So,
Nicole is saying book 2 is called The Seven Sisters. We remember the characters of the Seven Sisters in here. So, maybe it was something about them, though I'm not aware of that ever being released, but I think that's cool if it
yeah, I've
is.
never heard of the Seven Sisters.
I haven't either. Mm-mm.
Hmm.
Robert says waiting for Carabas to show up door. What is a bad penny anyway?
Yes.
Yeah, the jokes in here were
Um,
so interesting. They were so very dry, and I love dry as toast jokes because they're my sense of humor. It's like that biting sarcasm. Uh, Angela says, "Been 27 years since Neverwhere's publication. I really doubt there will be a sequel." Well, Gaiman himself says he's very bad about writing sequels
mm,
because um, I would argue like one of my top books I've ever read from him is Stardust, which is like I love that
I
story.
do too.
And he puts in the back of that story, he's like, "Well, I hope to revisit it and return there one day." And I'm like, "How long has it been since you've written that?" Like, he really is just terrible with sequels, which is why it's amazing that he ever even wrote, like, Anansi Boys, which is a book I still haven't
I
read
haven't
yet, but
read
that's
that
the
one either.
sequel. Yeah, the sequel to, not I have Good Omens stuck in my head, American Gods, there we go. Anansi Boys is the sequel to American Gods. He just doesn't do
Yeah, and
sequels.
also Stephen King, look at Stephen King. He wrote The Shining and then he wrote Doctor Sleep. Same thing with The Talisman and then we're writing Black House. So you never know.
Yeah, it's true.
But it's true, he may not. And maybe we don't need the sequel. Maybe it's up to us to decide what we want to think. And if I had to decide, I would have Richard Dorr and the Marquis joining forces and doing their own little thing and coming across some really funky people that eat funky things.
But you said A team, so is the Marquis pitying the fool? He
Yeah.
would be the one who pities everybody,
Yes, he
because
would.
they're all not as smart as him. And Nicole says book 2 doesn't seem like it was ever published, so that
Ah,
sounds like that makes sense.
yeah, that does. Yes, that is. Yes.
Sequel have been named even if oh,
Oh, yeah.
oh, that's very interesting. I don't know why anybody would name a book that hasn't been published, but that's cool to know that it would have been called The Seven Sisters. They were, interesting characters. Squealing about the supposed sequel. Um,
Yes, American Gods.
do I know who Emma Peel is? No, I don't. Do you know who Emma Peel is, Kat?
Do not.
Okay, okay. Robert, you might have to explain. So I love Nazi Boys, but never read American Gods. Oh, then you read them backwards. That's cool. They must not be like super tied to one another. Then I think one of them is kind of like a sequel prequel type thing. But like for you, Kat, because I've talked about some of his other works, how does Neverwhere compare?
Um, I like I said, when we were talking a little bit before, I think part of my issue with Neverwhere is timing.
Yeah.
Um, I had a similar situation with My Heart is a Chainsaw. I also had a similar situation actually with Sense and Sensibility as well. I just think my circumstances when I started reading this book were not under the happiest circumstances. So trying not to be distracted and then also trying to listen to it, traveling back and forth, North Shore, South Shore, I don't think I was in a mind of the best frame of mind, I guess, to give this book its proper due. So I do think I would, I mean, I know I'll read it again just because I have to do that. Now, whether or not I would read it like I did Sense and Sensibility, where I didn't do any kind of a review on Goodreads until I read it the second time, that's what I did with Sense and Sensibility. I waited to write my review. Whereas like My Heart is a Chainsaw, I went ahead, did my review, not intending to reread it, but I did it because there had been a gap between that and the sequel. So I don't know. I may revisit a lot sooner than I think. But all of the other books that I've read Odd and the Frost Giants, Coraline, The Graveyard Book, The Truth is a Cave in the Black Mountains, Stardust, and The Ocean at the End of the Lane. And I checked Goodreads to verify, and all 5 stars for me.
That's
All
awesome.
5 stars. But also too, Coraline and Graveyard Book are both
Middle
middle
grade.
grade, and
Yeah.
On the Frost Giants is YA. The Truth is a Cave in the Black Mountains is kind of like a folk tale, in my opinion.
I've never read that. I know of it, but
Um,
I haven't read it.
yeah, it's neat. It's got pictures. It's illustrated. Very cool. But oh, and also too, I read The Wolves in the Wall, which is a picture book by Neil Gaiman, and I'm pretty sure that was a 5 star read for me as well.
Hmm.
I'd have to look to verify that, but I'm pretty sure it was. So I clearly like his writing. I like his writing style. I like his fantasy elements. I enjoy his characters. I think he does a good job of creating some interesting characters and um, kind of sucking you into caring about them at a level that you feel like you are invested enough to go to the end of the book kind of thing. Even if you weren't having 100% of a good time, like maybe with content or what was happening to people in it,
Hmm.
you still cared enough about the character to keep going.
I
Yeah.
agree. I thought the characters were really well done, and Nicole came in towards the end and said, "What did everybody rate the book? Did I miss that part?" We actually did the ratings at the beginning to give context to everything that we talked about after Nicole. So I gave it 5 stars, and Kat gave it 4 stars.
Four
So
stars.
pretty solid. Yeah, very solid overall. What did you rate it, Nicole? Because you didn't get to say what you rated it. It's just as Good Omens as the next Gaiman read for me. I love that for you because that's what he wrote with Terry Pratchett, and that was my very first ever experience with Terry Pratchett, and it was my second Gaiman book ever. And I do not regret that decision at all. Like
Mhm.
I adored that book. Never watched the TV show. I've heard it's amazing, but I've only read the book.
I just looked up the picture book, and yes, it was 5 stars for me.
That's awesome.
So yeah, so I was really kind of like I said, I put a 3.5 when I started. That was like my initial kind of thought. And then it was like, okay, so which way am I going to swing? Am I going to swing? Goodreads, you can't do half stars. So it was either going to have to be down to a 3 or up to a 4 kind of thing. But the more and I do this all the time, especially if I'm writing a review, sometimes my what I initially put down sometimes changes. Or if I have a
Yeah.
conversation about it, sometimes
Mhm.
it changes
Yeah.
because I realized some things about it that maybe it didn't that I really did like stuff about it more than I thought. And then I also have to take in consideration comparing it to other books that I've liked. But I did find some of the book confusing. It was a little hard to get into initially for me. Um, and like I said, I just think timing has a lot to do with it. But
And I think all that's super fair. Absolutely. Yeah, I did want to give the opportunity as well to talk about how the Marquis got his coat back. This is actually the last thing that I have written for our discussion. So, did that short story recontextualize anything for you? And if it did, what did you think of him?
Oh, I loved him even more. I mean, I did. I couldn't help it. And I love the fact that we even see for someone who is so sure of himself, how he portrays to other people his insecurities with his brother Peregrine.
I know. I loved that because Marquis does not come across as somebody who has any amount of insecurity at all. And the fact,
and and that
yeah,
his brother has to save him, not
yes,
once, but twice.
but twice. Yes. He became a mindless sheep being herded, and his brother's like, damn it. I knew you didn't want me to follow you, but I did it anyway. Like, come on. And he seems like such a genuinely nice guy. And the part where DeCarabas, is talking about how, well, he didn't set out to become the Marquis because he wanted to be like anybody else. He wanted to be unique and interesting and dashing, just like Peregrine. And I was like, that's so good. It's so
I
good.
turned to that page because like I'm like I need to read this part right here because it was perfect. It just cracked me up so much because Peregrine just seemed like ta-ta, I'm here to save the day and I'm your pal and we are just best buds. And the Marquis is just
Scowling.
like, could you go away? Could you go away? You're like the thorn in my side that nobody knows about.
And the fact that he was the little brother, I was not expecting that he was the younger one, which is great. And
Yeah.
in my edition, I actually did get an illustration of Peregrine
Oh,
too.
I need to see.
If
I need
you
to
want to
see.
see
I
it.
need to see.
Do you
But
want
I
to?
did.
Did I show you one of the Carabas? Do you
No,
want?
you did
Okay,
not.
I'm so sorry. Let me get that one
I
first. So
just I liked it. I was glad to get a little more into his character. It made me like him more. And yeah. And when I think about him with his neck and the slit in his neck, about how he had to try to scream with his slit in his neck,
yep,
it made me think of Beetlejuice when they go to the lady. Remember the woman who they have to go talk to, and she smokes. And when she's smoking, she has a slit in her neck, and the
yep,
smoke is coming out of her
coming
neck.
out her neck.
That's what
Yep.
I was thinking of. It has nothing to do with Beetlejuice, but that is what came up in my mind when he was talking about, like, um, how you would have to live with a slice in your neck.
And apparently it healed rapidly, which is amazing. I kind of figured he was going to be like, I need to wear a kerchief for the rest of my life, type thing. I didn't know how that was going to work out. But so this is DeCarabas.
Oh, I never would have pictured him that way.
And so this is his brother,
Oh,
his older brother. And I thought they did such a great job of making them look similar, but
that's
still very distinct.
hilarious.
Yeah, that's so good. And I loved it too because Rebecca said, after this discussion and clearing up some things, I'm changing to a 4 star. Woo!
Nice. What was Rebecca's original score?
Uh, Rebecca, if you could comment that again, I'm gonna try to scroll back up here.
And I would
See, so
like to tell y'all that I actually had a cut on my throat when I was in a play. Somebody slit my throat on the disco dance floor, and I
oh
had
my,
to have, my makeup person had to make me a slit. So I was going to try to find my picture.
that's funny. Rebecca's original rating was a 3.5. So
Ah,
she went up to
very
4,
nice.
which I count that as a success. Yes. So happy about
Yes, I wouldn't be surprised if mine bumped up either, just because I think rereading it. I think this is part of the reason why I don't read a lot of fantasy is that it is hard for me sometimes um, to envision a world that has to be created from scratch, kind of thing. Like trying to visualize it, sometimes I'm not sure if I can do that very well. Yeah, so I'm gonna show you this picture of me with my cut throat.
that. Okay. Oh, that looks really good.
Isn't that good?
That's really good.
So
I
what
love
happened was before, when I had to go out on the dance floor because I was a owner, and I even have pictures of her doing my throat.
Oh, dang.
Yeah.
Oh,
But,
that's cool.
anyway, I had to wear a scarf. So that was the scarf I went out in. And
So
so then
fun.
it gets to a point where I'm playing with my scarf or whatever out on the dance floor, and then it happens to me, and then I have to be like, you know,
But no,
and I
like,
fall on
squirting.
the dance floor because I got murdered. And so then the whole dinner theater time, they're trying to figure out who murdered me.
Oh my god. Okay, if you were there at a murder mystery dinner, I would be there in a heartbeat
Well,
because that would be so
that's what it
fun.
was. That was my murder.
Yeah,
I'm doing my third one. My next one is going to be the second week of September. I'm a
I love
suspect
that.
this time.
Cool. I dang it, I wish I could go. That's so fun.
It's
Uh,
so silly. So silly.
and
We're doing Yellowstone. It's like blood on the Yellowstone or something like that. And so
oh,
I'm the governor. I've never even watched this TV show, so I don't
I've never
know.
seen Yellowstone.
I have
I
not.
It's based off of the TV show Yellowstone?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
my
like
grandma
it's
loved
a
that show.
parody. So like I think the person's name is Lynette Perry on the show. My name's gonna be my name is Linnell Berry. That's my name. So yeah, I can't show my suspect picture yet because of I have to wait till after production and then but I'll show you my suspect picture.
Okay, I please do, send that to me, I wanna see it.
Oh yes, the Marquis with his pockets.
Yeah, I did like that that was referenced earlier in the book, when he's pulling stuff out and he goes, "Oh, that's where that was," and he puts it back, and we end up learning that it's because the coat has pockets that he doesn't like, he can't find, and
Yes,
that's
but I think
really
the
great.
reason he has the pockets is because there is a part also that if he had his coat, he could get to that pocket that has something that could have saved him.
Yes.
But so I think it's one of these, it's like an army Swiss knife, but in coat form. That's how I
Yeah.
kind of envisioned it.
Yeah, absolutely, and, Alicia said it has been a great discussion for our first book club
Oh,
book.
thank
I
you, Alicia. We
Yeah, thank
appreciate
you.
everybody being here
Yeah.
to discuss it with us.
We know Heidi didn't like it. She was the DNF and said, "You just have to read good fantasy. This is not it. Trust me, Gaiman is his own genre." I do think Gaiman has his own unique voice, but
Yeah.
I definitely think that he kind of floats with genres. I think he kind of sometimes is a mixture between like fantasy and horror. He's
Mhm.
definitely not what I would call high fantasy, except in the case of like Stardust is probably the closest thing, and you've read that. So,
Yeah.
like, that's the closest thing to high fantasy because it's got, like, his witches and his shooting star and his, magic, and the star is
Mhm.
actually a person and, all of these things, which I enjoy, but this is more,
This is dark
magical
fantasy for
realism.
me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
dark fantasy, magical realism to a certain degree even because it does take place in our world. Um,
Yeah, it kinda I mean, it
so
has the same vibes to me as Fairy Tale by Stephen King, where
Mm,
it's like a portal. I mean, it
mhm,
is
mhm.
technically a portal fantasy in a way to me, if you think about it, because, I mean, the door is the portal for them to get to London below. You can't get there unless someone can come get you from there, right? Correct? You have to
Mhm.
have a door to go through. But it gives me those kind of vibes. That dark fantasy with horror elements to it.
I
So,
agree. Yeah, I completely agree with that.
oh, Robert, thank you.
Yeah, no capybara references though. I've been debating that I'm gonna get something capybara related and I'm gonna put it in frame somewhere and nobody's gonna know where it is until they spot it or I point it out
Aw,
and
I
like
love
just so I can have it.
capybaras.
Yeah, it's because that gets brought up all the time on my streams on Fridays and I'm like, I gotta get something capybara because I don't have anything in here. It says, "Cat, you will love Weird Sisters: A Love Letter to Theater." It's from,
Oh, yeah. You have
Cratchit.
told me about, Weird
Yes.
Sisters. That's
Yeah.
Discworld, though. I
Yes,
don't know
it
if I
is.
can read them out of order, though. That's just me with my weirdness.
If you're not going to read it or out of order, the only thing I would caution you about is the fact that the first two books are very, very different than any of the ones that follow.
Oh,
So if you read them and you're like, this doesn't seem right, or I don't really like this, don't assume that that's Discworld, because they
right.
very rapidly change. But I will help you through your journey. I would love to, very much so. Um, and Nicole said, I was just about to mention them, Robert. And Robert said, I sent you the capybara squeeze light link. A little squeeze light. That sounds cute. Thank you.
Has anybody here ever read? You have, I think the Diana Wynne Jones was the. I thought I had read a book by a series by her at one
Howl's
time.
Moving Castle.
No, it wasn't that. You read that.
I did read that. That's the
But
only
there
Diana
was
Wynne Jones.
one, there was a book that I read. I thought it was a series a long time ago when I worked in the library. I'll have to see if I can find the name of them. But it was sort of like a story with a world that was in a tapestry. And they had three sisters. They had like these sisters that came together. I don't think they were the Fates, but they were the sisters. And somehow there was a tapestry related to it somehow. I read that a long time ago, but it might not be her. It might be somebody else.
That doesn't sound familiar to me, so I probably haven't read it. Skeleton Key says Piers Anthony, question mark. Is it Piers Anthony?
No. Mm-mm. I don't know. I'm gonna have to do some research. It was a long time ago, and when I worked in the library, it was a series I read in there to recommend it to like middle grade.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember liking it, but it's been a long time.
And Nicole said, thanks for the discussion, ladies. Congrats on the start of your book club. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you so
Nicole.
much. We appreciate it.
And Skeleton Key said, something, something Skane. Does that sound
No,
familiar,
that
Kat?
doesn't sound familiar. No, I'm
Okay.
gonna have to do some research and see. But
Okay.
it's been so long. But anyway, this was fun. I
This
had a good
was,
time. I'm excited that we had pretty high ratings for this. We didn't have a lot of people D and F, so that was very good. And we had some people that may want to, read Neverwhere if they didn't get to it. And Robert's asking about our next book.
it's Boys in the Valley. This is what we are coming together in October. And I think, aren't we coming together on Halloween? Isn't it on Halloween?
Is it Thursday? I didn't think Halloween was on
It
Thursday.
might
No.
not be. I thought it was going to be interesting if we ended up
Oh
getting
well, if
Halloween
not,
is Thursday the 31st.
okay, but it is the last Thursday, huh?
It is. Yeah.
Well, we could always move it the week before if you want to, considering it's Halloween. I
I
don't
I would
know
be
how many
fine either way.
people. I think the only reason is you get a lot of people that do readathon stuff on Halloween.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we
So
might end up having to make an
I
announcement
don't want to
about that.
compete. I don't want
Yeah,
to compete.
that's very fair.
Um, yeah.
Thank you, everybody. This is fun. I wasn't expecting it to go 2 hours. I really wasn't. So this has been awesome. And
Yes.
yeah, thank you all. You all are great. Awesome comments. Super fun. And Kat,
Yes.
you're like you're fabulous. You're still fabulous
Oh,
all the time.
thank
You're always
you.
fabulous.
Thank you. And so are
Yeah,
you.
thank you. So I'm gonna wish everybody a good night. And thought thoroughly enjoyed the book club. Thank you.
Yay.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes,
So
thank y'all for being here.
yeah, hopefully you'll want to join in for our next discussion. If you like horror, read Boys in the Valley by Philip Forsassi, and maybe we'll see you again next time.
Yes. Bye.
Bye.